Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am Martin Andrews, Communication Director at inquirED, and welcome to our webinar, The Case for Elementary Social Studies, the ELA Connection. This is part one of a three-part series. And you can join us Tuesday, November 17th for part two, when we'll be joined by author and journalist Natalie Wexler. inquirED's webinars are co-hosted with the National Council for the Social Studies, and they're designed to examine important topics in social studies education, to prompt discussions, explore different viewpoints, and connect with others who are passionate about education. After every webinar, you receive an email from me, probably on Wednesday, and that will include a link to a blog post where we will summarize the webinar. We're going to link to any resources that our panelists mention. And then there'll be a recording of the webinar at the bottom of that blog post as well. And you can feel free to share that out with others. The email will also include a link to request a certificate of attendance if you need one. And I see that people are still joining, so thank you and welcome for those of you who are just joining. During the course of today's sessions, if you have questions, and we will have specific time for questions, but if questions come up during the course of the webinar, feel free to just go ahead and chat those. The chat is on for you, and share them as they come to you. And if we don't address them right away, we'll take time to examine them at the end of our session. So as I mentioned, today's webinar is co-hosted by inquirED. inquirED believes that inquiry-based learning should be available to every student in every classroom. We've created an inquiry-based elementary social studies curriculum that helps students build knowledge, develop critical thinking skills, make informed decisions, and take positive action to influence their world. And we create professional learning tools and resources like these free webinars that help teachers and instructional leaders implement inquiry across subject areas and grades in their schools and districts. It's also co-hosted by the National Council for the Social Studies. NCSS, founded in 1921, it's the largest professional association in the country devoted solely to social studies education. And the reason why this slide is up there is because the feature of every year is the NCSS conference. This year, of course, it will be virtual, and it is held there December 4th through the 6th. And you can see the great lineup of people that are going to be speaking to us, from Chelsea Clinton to Ken Burns, Samantha Power, George Taki. So many people are coming this year, probably because that they can just zoom right in there. So we're really excited to be partnering with NCSS. inquirED is also sponsoring the elementary social studies track there in the conference. So please go to socialstudies.org. Check out more about the National Council for the Social Studies and register for the conference. So you know a little bit about the co-hosts. Next, we want to find out a little bit about you. So I'm going to launch a quick poll to find out what your role in education is. Are you an instructional coach, a principal, a high school teacher, an elementary teacher? So how about I launch this poll right now and take a few seconds to complete it. I know that lots of us in education wear multiple hats. So if you fall into many different categories, please just go ahead and pick as many as apply. And then we'll share that poll with you. Yes. We'll share that poll with you, the results here, once we get about 80% of you who have completed it. So we got lots of elementary teachers out there, specifically probably here because of the subject that we're talking about today. Lots of curriculum leads, instructional support. So we've got about 80% of you that have voted now. I'm going to share those results with everyone. So we do have a wide range of people here today playing different roles. Most of you, the largest percentage are curriculum leads. So you are probably wondering what we can say about the ELA connection and social studies. And I want to talk a little bit about who is going to help us figure that out today. So we have three guests with us today. Adam Tyner is the Associate Director of Research at the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, where he helps develop and manage Fordham's research projects. Prior to joining Fordham, he served as Senior Education Analyst at Hanover Research, where he executed data analysis projects and worked with schools and districts and other education stakeholders to design custom studies. Adams also spent several years leading classrooms, teaching English as a second language in both China and in California, teaching courses at the University of California, San Diego. His work has appeared and been cited in national and international media such as The Economist, New York Times, Forbes, Education Week, Education Next, and The Diplomat, as well as numerous local outlets. Hey, Adam, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, and we're also joined by Stephanie Wager. She serves as the president of the National Council for the Social Studies. She's also the social studies consultant for the Iowa Department of Education. In this role, she provides leadership and guidance at the state level for social studies education. Prior to this, she taught high school social studies for Des Moines Public Schools and worked at the Institute Thomas Jefferson in, can I say this right? Can you pronounce this for me, Stephanie?
Naucalpan.
Naucalpan, Mexico. In addition, she formerly served as the coordinator of a Teaching American History grant. Stephanie was named an emerging leader in education by ASCD. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And our final panelist here is Shanti Ellen Govin. After obtaining a master's degree in education from Columbia University, Shanti moved from classroom teacher to coach to curriculum director. And eager to help education organizations scale their impact, she went on to earn an MBA, and she quickly put those skills to work by envisioning and implementing strategies to grow the National Center for Teacher Residency's impact. In 2017, Shanti founded inquirED to scale the use and impact of inquiry-based learning, a powerful teaching pedagogy that prepares students for the 21st century. Shanti, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
And so the first part of this webinar, I'm going to kind of turn the mic over to Adam, and he's going to give us some background about the study that is really going to serve as the basis for our discussion today. So Adam, I'm going to kind of turn things over to you, and you can walk us through.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Martin. And thanks so much to you all for having me here to talk about our study and to talk about this important topic. What I'm going to do in this quick presentation, here's our to-do list. I'm going to talk a little bit about the motivation and theory of the study that we conducted that was just released by the Thomas B. Fordham Institute a couple of weeks ago. The entire study is available for download at fordhaminstitute.org. You can just surf right there and get the entire study, but I'm going to give you the highlights here. So we're going to talk a little bit about the motivation and theory for that study. We're going to talk very briefly about the data that we used from the ECLS-K. I'm going to talk then about the results of the study, which is how in classroom instructional time is distributed across subjects in elementary classrooms, and what the effects of different types of instructional time are on literacy during elementary school. And then I'm going to talk for just a second about some kind of implications that we draw from that, from those results and also from the broader research landscape. So the most important thing, I think, and motivating this is that we have a literacy crisis in the United States. We have only a third of students, according to the National Assessment of Educational Progress, who are reading proficiently at either 4th or 8th grade, slightly over a third overall. This is the 2019 data. This is not the advanced level of reading. This is just proficiency. And you can see that for students who are coming from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, these numbers are even more abysmal. It's 1 in 5 students who is reading at that proficient level, according to the NAEP. If you look at other studies of this, you might see slightly different numbers, but all the numbers I've seen are very concerning. Even if you look at adult literacy numbers, sometimes those can be kind of, I mean, you see that there's a lot of adults out there who are functionally illiterate. So we have a literacy problem, and we're looking for answers. The obvious answer might be to teach reading skills. And in lots of classrooms around the country, you'll see a lot of practicing reading passages and then finding the main idea or identifying key points, summarizing these types of reading skills. You can go to the next slide, Martin. But we argue in our background section and kind of the implications and based on the broader research, there's a lot of people who say that really practicing reading, generalized reading skills is something that's either a waste of time or at least something that has a lot of diminishing returns. It's good to do a bit of that, but maybe you could do too much of it. And that the real key to being able to be a good reader is having knowledge, having background knowledge about the topic that you're reading. And so you can imagine if you open a newspaper and you open an article, imagine that you're an elementary school student or a middle school student, and you open that newspaper and it's a topic that you don't really know very much about. Your reading comprehension isn't really that much based on, can you find the main idea in that topic or in that article? It's about, do you know anything about that topic? Do you know the relevant vocabulary? Do you know what these concepts mean? There's a kind of famous exercise that people like me do in front of audiences like you all, educated audiences, where we put up a passage about something that we don't actually know about and we try to decide if we can read it. And so a famous example is that they put up a passage about the sport of cricket, and most Americans don't know anything about how cricket works. They don't understand what the terminology is, wickets and all this stuff. And they put this up, and then we read it and we realize, yeah, we can read it. We can read all of the words basically. But then we say, can we understand it? Do we have comprehension? And we realize that for those people who don't know anything about cricket, the whole thing is incomprehensible. And the reason is because reading comprehension relies so much on background knowledge. And that is the case in a passage about cricket. It's also the case if you open up the sports page in a country where they play cricket, or if you open up the world history, the world page, the global events page, and you don't know anything about the history of any of those countries or what the difference between a country and a continent is. So our hypothesis was that students who spend more instructional time building knowledge will gain greater reading skills in the medium to long term. And that led to two specific research questions. One is descriptively, how does classroom time spent on different subjects differ across elementary schools? So like, how much time are we spending in these different subjects? And then secondly, do students who are in classrooms where they spend more time on certain subjects make greater progress in reading during elementary school years than other students? So the data that we use is this federal data set, the ECLS-K, which is an incredibly rich data source. It's based on tracking 18,000 students from kindergarten all the way, I think they're still tracking them actually. We have data through fifth grade. So it's tracking them for 6 years. There's data from teacher surveys, from administrator surveys, from parent surveys. And crucially, we have lots of assessments of these students throughout their academic career. So we can really track and see how students are progressing and what kind of educational experiences they're having. And so we end up looking at how instructional time is used. There's a teacher survey. They talk about how much time they spend on different subjects, and then we're able to compute an estimate for how much time students are getting in different subjects across their elementary school careers. Of course, we can look at it year by year, but we end up putting this all together from first grade to fifth grade and using kindergarten kind of as our baseline control. So you can go to the next slide, Martin. So the first thing that we look at is just how is elementary instructional time being allocated across these subjects in America's elementary school classrooms. And the big picture is that we're spending about 2 hours a day on English language arts instruction. We're spending over an hour a day, 82 minutes, on math, And then we're spending a half an hour or less on science, social studies, combination of arts and music that includes theater and dance and art, and music is just 23 minutes, 19 minutes for PE. I gotta scoot this over, 3 minutes for foreign language, although I think there's extreme variation depending on whether foreign language is something that the schools do. But what you can see is that this is just dominantly ELA. 40% of the instructional time is English language arts, and social studies is getting just 28 minutes according to the teachers in these surveys. So when we look at, as students, these students' elementary careers, and we look at we have a really strong picture of what they look like in kindergarten in terms of their academic abilities and even their non-cognitive skills. There's non-cognitive measures that we're able to incorporate into getting a good picture of what those students are like in kindergarten. And then we watch them over these 5 years and see how is instructional time varying for these students. And then we look at them in 5th grade and we look at their reading tests there. What we find is that the only subject, and we kind of pooled all of those small subjects like foreign language and art into this non-core bucket because we didn't have a lot of clear, it was very noisy data for those small buckets, and so we just put that into the non-core group. We have 5 then subjects. We have the 4 core subjects of ELA, math, science, and social studies in this non-core group. And we find that the only subject that has a statistically significant correlation with the progress that these students are making academically in reading is social studies. If it's not a gigantic effect, it is 15% of a standard deviation on the 5th grade social studies assessment. And you might think this is just the 5th grade assessment. Is this just a correlation with the 5th grade score? And recall that we have a very good picture of them in kindergarten. We control for all of those factors. So this is really best interpreted as the progress that they made from kindergarten to 5th grade. And we're seeing that those students are doing 15% of a standard deviation better on those reading test scores than the ones who are getting half an hour less of social studies time. And for ELA, we're not really seeing any kind of correlation. It's 3% of a standard deviation. It's over 5 years. It's not remotely statistically significant, and it's very model dependent, whether that's a positive or a negative. If you change a few things, it might flip negative. Here it's positive 3% of a standard deviation, but there's just not a strong correlation. That actually surprised us, but maybe it shouldn't have, considering so much time is used in ELA that we very well may be past the point of diminishing returns. And that marginal amount of time is what we're really looking at. It's just that marginal time. The marginal time isn't really making much of a difference. It's not hurting them. We don't have any evidence that the ELA time is harmful, but we have evidence that it's not really correlated. So what we draw from this, there's this cliche, first students need to learn to read, then they can read to learn. And I think that that's misguided. I think that students can be building literacy skills, including vocabulary, even before they can decode. And once they can decode, it's not that they need to necessarily be practicing some discrete reading skills, although some of that may be helpful. That's not the main thing that makes you a good reader. It's really about building background knowledge and understanding more stuff about the world, understanding the difference between a country and a continent. These things, and other subjects as well as social studies probably contribute. We don't find that in our results, but anything that's building knowledge that students are going to need to access later is probably going to be helpful. And it's the focus, the central focus on these kind of literacy skills may be misguided. And so classrooms could benefit from having more time on content-rich subjects like social studies, and with students learning more about the world and gaining the knowledge and vocabulary that are keys to their future literacy. That's what we take away from it, and we'll be looking forward to having a broader conversation about these issues with the panel and with y'all.
And there's a link there to the Fordham Institute. You can also follow them on Twitter at Education Gadfly. Love that tag. And I got a question, will this presentation and will the webinar be shared with all attendees? Yes. So if you want to go out and campaign for the social studies, you can use these some of these slides and the information on them to help you. So thanks Adam for that quick rundown of the study. I know it's much more complex and in depth, and people can read the whole thing if they go to the Fordham Institute. But now let's dig in, and to do that, I'm gonna turn things over here to Shanti. And Shanti, I think you're gonna lead a discussion both with Stephanie and Adam to sort of dig into some questions about implications and a little bit about the study. So I'm actually gonna stop sharing my screen here, and then we'll get a full view of our panelists, and I'll bow out. So so Shanti, go ahead, and the mic is yours.
Thank you, Martin. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Adam, for that grounding. It's a really, first of all, obviously some selfish intent on my part, but, you know, really a very interesting study and some interesting work you all have done. And we couldn't be more excited about it. And I appreciate you coming on and talking about it. And so I wanted to start actually today by turning it a little bit to Stephanie, and I'll come back to you with some questions as well, Adam. But I wanted to talk about, Stephanie, you know, sometimes we hear about research and we hear about studies coming out, and people say, oh, I'm not sure, how is that measuring up to what we're seeing in the field? So I wanted to hear from you, Stephanie, a little bit about how you see this measuring up. You know, is this following what you're seeing, and how you're kind of what your thoughts are from after reading the study?
Yeah, thank you, Shanti. Yeah, I think that this study completely confirms what many social studies educators have anecdotally observed, have thought, you know, for years, really, and have really been advocating for years. I mean, from these observations, I know in my own work, whether it be through NCSS, or some of you may be familiar with the marginalization of social studies infographic that's kind of floating out there. Several of us State Department folks were involved in creating that, and have really been trying to push, you know, this message that there is such a strong connection between reading and social studies, and that we have to really fundamentally change, you know, the way that we're thinking about addressing, you know, the teaching of reading, but also, of course, the teaching of social studies within that. So I absolutely think it measures up with what we're trying to push, and what we've, you know, been seeing for years.
Yeah, you know, I actually said to Adam the other day that I was actually surprised by the 28 minutes. I actually thought that I would actually be interested in what the mode was, Adam. I'm not going to quiz you right now on what the mode was, but I'm curious, because I actually think 28 minutes a day in an elementary school is at the high. We talk to a lot of partners that are excited if they can get to 28 minutes a day in an elementary classroom. So I'd be curious to know a little bit more about that. But Adam, I think, you know, Stephanie, you hit on this idea that we've been talking about it a lot in the social studies world, but it hasn't. You know, social studies world, unfortunately, is sometimes an insulated world. And I'm curious, which is very interesting because we have so much to do with our everyday lives, but we'll put that aside for a second. And so, Adam, I'm curious, you know, a lot of, especially the reading war topics that have come up in the news lately, you know, this has been it's been a huge topic. I'm curious just what led you and your team to kind of dig into this particular side of the reading wars that hasn't gotten as much kind of, you know, publicity and media attention as background knowledge has.
Yeah, well, I know, I think it's a combination of kind of seeing such shocking literacy outcomes for so many of America's students. And, you know, frankly, a lot of people that I've been working with, they've been working on this question a lot longer than I have, but a lot of people at the Fordham Institute have been concerned for a long time about the de-emphasis of knowledge in schools, and in the extent to which a lot of times skills that are sometimes especially in the world of elementary reading, are these kind of like abstract skills that sound, there's this intuition among a lot of people. And I think I've thought this way in the past also, that you You read, you learn how to read, and then you can read everything. Reading is this kind of discrete skill that you can learn independently of other things. And it's confusing because there is an aspect of reading that really is a discrete skill, which is decoding. You have an alphabetic language here. This is learning the correspondence between letters and sounds is very important in the early grades. And that is a discrete skill that you can learn independently of content. Like you see a B in a different word and it normally has the same sound as it had in another word. So it is transferable. It is a real skill. But once you're past that, and I shouldn't say past that chronologically, because even before that, like I was saying in my implications, you can be building vocabulary, you can be building knowledge, and that is really the substance of what it means when we say, can someone read? Can you read the newspaper? It means, do you know anything about those topics? Because if you don't know anything about the topic in that article, you're going to struggle to read it regardless of your decoding ability and regardless of how much time you've spent finding the main idea in passages that you read and kind of, doing these test prep skills, which have become very common in America's elementary school classrooms. So we've been observing this for a long time, and we saw that there was this data source that no one had ever really used to kind of get at an angle of this. And it's not perfect. I mean, we don't know anything about the quality of the social studies instruction, what kind of curriculum they're using. We don't know what the substance of that is, or the ELA instruction, or the other types of instruction. So it's a 30,000 foot view, but it's also a nationally representative view, which is unlike a lot of studies.
Yeah.
And so that was just a new data source that we thought, this may shed some light on this question that we've been, asking about and trying to kind of see what the evidence is for several decades now.
Yeah. Adam, this is a follow-up question for you, and also Stephanie, I'd love if you could build off of this as well. Is the approach that you've taken is also a little bit different. Even the folks that have been talking about background knowledge in the reading wars kind of controversies that have been occurring have really focused on ELA curriculum. So ELA curriculum taking the lens of building background knowledge. And you all have kind of taken the approach of really focusing on social studies instruction as an opportunity to build background knowledge. And I'm curious if you could just speak to a little bit of kind of what your thoughts are around that, a little bit about the different approaches. And Stephanie, I'd love for you to weigh in as well as kind of what your thoughts are about those two kind of lenses that we're coming at it with.
Well, I think that if I can go first, I think that this intuition that reading as a discrete skill is something that is everywhere. I think it's the way that most people think about reading. And I saw Sal Khan, the guy who started Khan Academy, somebody that I've read his stuff and admire him. I saw him do this kind of Q&A with the Washington Post recently, and they asked him, like, if there was one piece of advice you'd give to schools, what would it be? And Sal Khan said, focus on the basics, reading and math. Once students can do that, they can do the rest. And I think that the neglect of social studies and the neglect of science and the neglect of these other subjects, it contributes, it's of a piece with the problems that we're having with literacy. And a lot of people don't get that. And I think it's because it's very intuitive that reading is this discrete thing. But I think we're just trying to separate that out. The truth is that the reason why we focus on social studies and not, say, content-rich ELA in this study is methodological. It's because the data we have don't give us information about the content of any of them. So I'm not against content-rich ELA, and I think that there's no conflict between having content-rich ELA and having more time for other subjects. So that's my take on the question about whether this should be about social studies or should it be about content-rich ELA. I think it should be about both.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Adam that it should be about both. I think oftentimes when people have sort of tried to address this, or at least the conversation I hear from some educators is, well, the students read a text in ELA time about Martin Luther King, or we read a text about the Berlin Wall or whatever the topic was. However, I think there's some other research to support that really isn't, if you're just reading sort of one-off text, right? You're not really building knowledge. You're just reading a text that has, something to do with social studies, but that's not really building knowledge deeply about that theme or that compelling question, that we talk about so much in social studies. So I think, to me, that's where the real, kind of sweet spot is. And I think why the study is so impactful is because, in social studies, we are promoting, this inquiry-based, concentrated time of really delving into important issues, right, in society. And if we're just sort of doing one-offs, right, that's not really, not only from a reading perspective, I think, but just from a kind of a civil rights equity perspective, we certainly aren't doing students, a service with that approach, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, let me ask you a little bit about substance as well, kind of digging even further into that. Kind of again, going to what's getting the attention in the media, I think is really the history component of social studies. And I wonder if you could both speak to kind of thinking about social studies, and I think there's been this equivalency of background knowledge equals history knowledge. And kind of in putting that into light in terms of social studies. Stephanie, if maybe you want to answer this one first, and then we can go to Adam.
Sure. I mean, I think we often use social studies and history, synonymously, and of course, history is a discipline within social studies, but we also talk, social studies is really the power of all of those disciplines sort of connected, and we know that adults nor students learn things in isolation, right? I don't go from, history block to economics block. I think about the interconnection of those things together. And so I think that that's really impactful to think about, sort of the social studies and how they work together. And I think this idea that, students, especially elementary students, can't think in complex ways and can't, delve deeply into information is just false. I mean, I can tell you, I have a third grader, and he's literally on 270 to win, like every night, playing with the Electoral College map, which is probably very different from most third graders, but he can, and many students that I engage with every day, I mean, they can have complex conversations. And again, going back to kind of this issue of equity, I think we are really we're doing a disservice to kids to sort of say, well, I don't want to talk about those issues, or I don't want to engage with those issues because it might be messy or for whatever reason. So I think that was kind of an answer to your question, Monty, but I think it's just so important that we recognize that students want to talk about these issues, and we're doing a disservice if we don't address this.
Yeah, I think one of the questions that people have about elementary social studies, it comes down to rigor and how good actually is elementary social studies. Is it, I've heard somebody, maybe it was Stephanie, talking about it was coloring time or something. There's teachers out there who said that, the coloring time, that was social studies because they were coloring a picture of some historical, scene or something. And this may be something to ask Natalie Wexler about when you have her in your next session, because she's been kind of critical of elementary social studies. There's a lot of it being not very rigorous. Me and my community, she said, and that is not very rigorous. My colleagues at Fordham have also been very skeptical of that type of social studies, and have really lots of times equated history and geography with the rigorous part of social studies. I actually don't see it that way, because I think that there's a lot of we're talking about first grader or second grader, there's a lot of me and my community stuff that can be quite valuable for them to start thinking about who are the social actors. What are the social problems? What are the social decision-making processes? How do how do leaders emerge in different groups, or who are those groups? Or, what are the houses of worship in my community, and who participates in those? And, how does that all play into our social life, our political life? I think those things can be valuable when you're talking about young students I don't think, I'm not meaning to discount history and geography. I think students can learn some history at those early ages. We sometimes hear that that's developmentally inappropriate for those students. And I don't agree with that, because I was, having biographies of historical figures read to me and reading them when I was in those young ages. And I think most students can latch onto those narratives and learn vocabulary and history too. But I actually don't think that me and my community stuff is necessarily bad either. So shouldn't be coloring time, but I think that, the content of the social studies stuff is something that I want to hear more about. And I think maybe, some of the audience might have thoughts about this too.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in there too, because it's interesting, because I see a little bit of a meeting of skills focus and social studies. So we have I think a second grade unit, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Shanti, that is a My Community unit, but they are looking at the businesses in their community, and they're looking at the services in their community. They're analyzing supply and demand and producers and consumers. And so it goes really deep into that, and it's a 6-week-long unit. But what's interesting is some of the teachers that when they first encounter it, they say, our students don't know these terms. We need to pre-teach them all before we go into the unit. And what we say is, don't, because the unit is deep enough that they are going to, by the end of this, have talked about these concepts, read about these concepts, designed solutions around the concepts. So the depth of understanding will be built by the end. If you pre-teach everything students don't know, like that's the point, is that you go deep over time and students develop not only knowledge, but fluency in using these terms. So I think that I appreciate you standing up for those kind of units and how they are taught, because that's really what matters a lot, I think.
I think how, and also like the devil's in the details, right? Like, what are we asking students to do? Are we asking them to just color a paper about the people in the, in the community, or something really low level? Or are we asking them to really engage, significantly in that content? And I think if we're asking them to do that, then that's very different than I think what sometimes, at least we think about in our head. I mean, if you ask, I've asked this question all over my state, of teachers and administrators, what was your experience in elementary social studies? And so I think a lot of us, we have a mental picture, and we think of that mental picture when we are, thinking about what social studies should be. And perhaps in some cases, our mental picture based off of our own experience is not, accurate about what really should be happening in classes, across the country. So I would just offer that as a little anecdotal research, that I think people's anecdotal mental picture might be different.
Yeah, I just want to really echo what you said, Stephanie, there. Sorry to jump in as I'm supposed to be asking questions, but it's hard not to say put my opinion in. But the piece about the devils in the details is really important, because I think we tend to, in education, take, well, okay, we're going to go with this now. We're going to get really focused on this idea, or we're going to go really focused on this idea, and there's a lot in the details. And so we get really focused on what's the name of this thing, and we really have to go further down into the details, as Martin is talking about, really as all three of you are talking about, is what's underneath that, and are we getting to rigorous, sustained investigation when students are really building deep background knowledge, because that can't come by memorizing vocab terms. That can't come through coloring a worksheet. That can't come, there has to be a deep understanding and complexity and all of those things that we bring into the work. Obviously that's my opinion, and not, I'm throwing it in as a facilitator, but yeah, let me pivot us a little bit to thinking about policy implications. So Stephanie, you know, for those of you here attending, Martin introduced Stephanie as both the president of the National Council for Social Studies, but also works with the State Department of Education in Iowa. And so I'd love to hear your opinion about just kind of thinking about what do you see as the policy implications here? And really, do you think, you know, this studies like this have the power to start to shift the minds at the policy level?
Yeah, I mean, of course, my personal opinion is that I think and have thought for many years that this kind of thing should really push us fundamentally in a different direction in what, you know, is happening in elementary schools across the country. I think, you know, connected to that, and I think Adam has some experience living abroad as well, really looking at what other countries do. I mean, our system is fairly different, I would say, from most other, at least developed countries in terms of how they think about building knowledge. And so I think learning from the way that other countries certainly approach this issue connected to knowledge building is also really important, because it's certainly what I have observed from both living in other countries and visiting other countries. So I think that's just something for us to think about. But going back to your original question, I mean, I hope, my hope is certainly that this will push us in a fundamentally different direction. I think from an NCSS lens, we also have had a far greater emphasis recently on advocacy. So I think this will certainly be something that we will continue to push from an advocacy lens. I think, you know, going back to the part of your question about kind of changing, you know, hearts and minds, I think the hard part of this question is we have to change, you know, minds and hearts, because I do think that there are some really ingrained just thinking. I think Adam kind of alluded to this in his answer. And even, you know, from sort of the ELA field, I think that there are some strong, you know, we ideas about you have to teach ELA for this amount of time, you have to do it in this way. And so I think this will really hopefully push folks to consider some changes in that area to get us hopefully back in the direction where we see more balance in that chart that Adam shared, but also can really start having conversations about the quality of social studies, because time is certainly, I think, the first roadblock, but then you really have to think, I think, about the quality of what you're seeing in elementary classrooms as well.
Yeah, Adam, kind of building off that similar question to you, is what are you seeing as the community response? What's been the response to the work you're putting out?
Well, I gotta say, I don't think it's just because of our work. I think this has been good to be able to have some conversations like the one we're having today, and we're going to continue to be having those conversations. We're going to have an event. The Fordham Institute's hosting an event at the end of the month with E.D. Hirsch, which I'd encourage all of your followers to think about checking into. So we're definitely doing what we can to raise attention around this issue. And but I don't think it's just this, but I do think that we may be at an inflection point right now in the way that we think about elementary literacy. This report has gotten attention, and I think a lot of social studies educators are going to be stepping up and saying, hey, this is an important thing that we need to think about in the context of not just social studies, but in the context of literacy as well. But we're also seeing some changes in regard to around phonics instruction. Just this week, we've got you know, what I think they're calling a pivot and others are calling recanting. We've got people who've been pushing you know, being really deep downplaying the importance of phonics for a long time in the literacy world, are now taking that back and saying that, you know, phonics really should be central. It is a little bit of rote memorization at the beginning, but it's very valuable. I mean, I learned phonics. I believe in it because of common sense, but there's also just like a litany of scientific research on this, that phonics is very important in those, you know, getting that decoding down is really important. That literacy, at least at the elementary level, is about decoding, and it's about knowledge. And that is the key to getting students to being really literate and able to read lots of different texts and then being able to think critically about them. And that, I think we may be at a place where we start to see some real shifts on this. I think we're seeing them already. And I hope it goes in that direction. It definitely needs to, considering that 4/5 of our economically disadvantaged children in this country can't read proficiently, according to the NAEP.
And Shanti, I think there are also, I mean, just to build off of what Adam said, I think this is such a complex sort of cyclical problem, right? So we have, in terms of marginalization, I mean, certainly a lot of it has to do with policy implications and pressure and accountability for reading and math. But, we could talk about, preparation of teachers in terms of pre-service. We could talk about, certainly lack of access. I mean, inquirED is one of the only elementary social studies curricula that even really exists. I mean, there's a handful of others, but there's not a long list of things, out there that are high quality elementary social studies materials. Core knowledge certainly exists, but there's not a lot. So that's certainly one of the other issues from a policy perspective. Lack of access to professional development. I mean, ask elementary teachers, what do you what professional development do you get? It's pretty rare to get social studies specific professional development for an elementary teacher. So I mean, there's just a number of issues that I hope this kind of thing will really, turn the corner on, so that we can really address these issues from, not only a policy perspective, but just that hearts and minds kind of issue as well.
Yeah. Well, with that, I'm pretty sure that I could keep peppering you both with questions for a good another hour or so, but I can see the chat going crazy, so I'm pretty sure there's some questions. So I'll turn the mic back over to Martin and see for audience Q&A.
Yeah.
Thank you both, Stephanie and Adam. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you.
And thanks Shanti for that discussion. We had a number of questions that have appeared, but I'm going to sort of send it out to our attendees right now. If you want a specific question that you want to ask our panelists, please please do so. And I will scroll back up through and take a look at some of the questions that have already been asked. There was someone who mentioned in the chat about Ed Hirsch's core knowledge curriculum, that the research there is powerful, but reinvigorating social studies at the elementary level with fidelity, but avoid traveling down the core knowledge avenue. Again, I think there were some issues that people found with that, because it becomes an issue of deciding, what's important, and then how it doesn't address necessarily how to teach that information. But I'll start asking questions here. Any attendees using, I don't want to do that one. I would like panelists' opinion on whether current teacher content knowledge is sufficient to provide the quality social studies instructions that will lead to better reading outcomes. So I'll take that to Stephanie, because you're very much immersed in the world of social studies educators. The content knowledge that your elementary teachers have, is it sufficient to provide the quality social studies instruction that's going to lead to better reading outcomes?
Well, I mean, I would first say, I think, Adam talked a little bit about in his explanation that this, particular study didn't control for that, didn't know what teacher background was in social studies or the quality of that instruction. So I think, I think that's important to note here related to this study. But I think, certainly there are other research pieces that would point to teachers either saying, I don't have the content knowledge I need, or I don't feel comfortable teaching these, these topics, whatever that might be. So I think that there is definitely a lack of at least comfort in many cases in in teaching social studies. And again, going back to the piece I just said, is that a result at the pre-service level? In some cases, is that a result because oftentimes teachers that I work with they don't get professional development that's specific to social studies once they enter in the classroom itself. So I do think it's kind of an endless cycle where, not necessarily blaming the teacher, but blaming kind of the system, right, is not set up to necessarily at the elementary level support that, building of the background that teachers would need in order to do that. So I think, I think I'm kind of answering your question, or kind of answering the question, but there are lots of factors, I think, at play in thinking about teacher background knowledge, but I don't think that should be a barrier in saying, well, teachers don't have the background knowledge, so we just shouldn't do it, right? We have to really figure out how to do it and do it well, I think.
That's one of the things that I've learned about what actually drives more social studies into the classroom in many schools is because there's a teacher who cares about social studies. And that's great for that classroom. Yeah. But it's not great for the system as a whole if it's really dependent on the teachers, having an elementary school teacher who has a personal interest in them. Sometimes they call these like maverick teachers or whatever, who kind of like force their will on, we're going to have some social studies in this class because it's something that they care about and know that is important. But it can't just be left up to them. And so I think that's a place where, curriculum leads, it's the plurality of our audience. Those curriculum leads they have some power to shape, what goes into those classrooms and to help along those teachers who maybe don't feel like social studies is really their main topic, but to help them see how they can teach those concepts and vocabulary and integrate it into the classroom and not have it be a painful thing that's hard for them because it doesn't feel like it's the thing that they're most passionate about. So unfortunately, probably among curriculum leads, we see the same thing where there's some who are passionate about social studies and they're the ones who would join this kind of conference, and then there's some who aren't, and so I think we're going to have a lot of work to do on that related to curriculum more broadly, and making sure that social studies doesn't get marginalized and neglected as it has been.
Great, and I want to go back to our questions here, and Shanti, I'll ask this one to you because I know that there is a lot of time and consideration spent on our learning experience team, and you get pulled into these conversations a lot. How do you address teaching hard history about issues like systemic racism, or making sure that you're culturally responsive in a developmentally appropriate way for elementary age?
Well, I'm glad you pulled me in for the easy one. Perfect. It's a softball question. Thank you.
I was like, I'm glad he's asking Shanti this one.
So, no favoritism here, I guess. But yeah, the honest truth is, it's a really complicated question. So I want to just say, just from the get-go, that is not easy. There is no way to make that easy. There are many components of teaching hard history to students. First of all, that's having a safe community. So that's having a space in your classroom where students feel that they can have challenging conversations, where they can confront things that are challenging to look at, to read about, to encounter. That's kind of the first thing. So that's a social emotional component that is really needed in order to think about the complexities of history. The other piece of it for me is it really cannot be superficial. So when you jump from topic to topic, so when you spend a week on, maybe slavery, and the next week you're on to whatever the topic is, the, War of 1812, or whatever the topic is, when you jump from topic to topic, it's very difficult to get to that complexity because students don't have that background knowledge, again, to be able to jump into that complexity. They haven't, so you're kind of starting at the superficial level, and that's all you're getting to. And so that's where we really believe in deep, sustained investigation. That complexity can't come out in 1, 2, even 3 lessons, that there needs to be a building of background knowledge that builds you into that complexity, that reveals different parts of it, that really thinks about different perspectives of that complexity. But that can't happen without time. And so instructional time is a huge component of it, that when we try to boil it down, even at this number that we're talking about at 28 minutes, you cannot get to that complexity. You can't get to that complexity with adults, let alone with kindergartners or first graders, second graders, fifth graders, you know? So that is the truth of the matter, is that it really takes time. It takes that social emotional side of it, and it takes time to get down to the work. I will also say, I think this might be a bit controversial for me to say, but there are a lot of folks that say, well, teachers can write their own social studies curriculum. And I think social studies tends to be the one that districts say, oh, we'll just write our own. Teachers will just write their own. And I think when we're talking about difficult topics, we have to really think about vetting of sources. What are the sources we're using? Where are we getting them from? And a world within where it's very challenging to tell the difference between sources, we need to really support teachers in being able to think about the sources they're providing. And so teachers, it's not that they don't have the skill set, it's they don't have the time. They're spending 8 hours a day in front of students. And so, you know, our curriculum team, I will see conversations going for hours on end about a particular source and where it came from and whose lens it, and is it developmentally appropriate, is it reading level appropriate, all of the different aspects that are there. And so, and that's on one source, let alone the thousands of sources that are within our curriculum. And so I think there's something to think about there, is that when we're asking teachers to write their own curriculum, there's a challenge there in thinking about challenging, difficult conversations, and what may happen in terms of that teacher, and the challenge of just figuring out how the sources they might bring in and the perspectives they might bring in to have those challenging conversations.
I
Really well said,
agree.
Shanti.
I think the only thing I would share is a kind of a personal story. Going back to my son last year, I was picking him up from school, and we were doing the normal, you know, kind of how was your day and what did you do? And, you know, he obviously knows what I do. And so I, you know, went through the, you know, what'd you do for math and reading? And we got to social studies, and, you know, he said, you know, we didn't have social studies again, Mom, which is the common answer. And he kind of paused for a second and said, you know, Mom, does that mean that people don't care about the world? And I found that to be a really profound question, you know, just for someone his age. But I think I'm bringing it up because I think when we don't then address social studies in general, and certainly when we don't address sort of hard history or things that are happening in the world, we're doing such a disservice to our students. And students, you know, they're hearing about these things, they're wondering about these things, and so to just ignore them, I think does a complete disservice. So I'm not trying to offer that story from a selfish perspective, but I think so much about what our students are, what message we're sending to our students when we don't teach social studies is another message, and I think something for us to consider.
Absolutely. I think we are running out of time here, and I just wanted to have enough time to remind people that, first of all, the chat has just been great. It's one of the first times I'm usually hosting, so I'm always talking, and to watch people on the chat, all of you who are sharing resources, who are just participating with each other and helping each other out. That's one of the things that I think everyone on this webinar would agree with, is that we are so much more powerful than one of us when we share our resources, when we have conversations, when we share the work that we're doing. So webinars like this one, the networks that NCSS provides, the networks that you can form in your own school or district can be so much more powerful, and you can advocate for the social studies with others. You can join national networks. So that's a very important thing, and I'm seeing that happen in the chat, and it's really, really wonderful. I just want to thank Adam for coming here today and for the work that Fordham did to put this out and get these conversations started. So Adam, thanks for joining us and thanks for that study. And is there anything, is he frozen?
It looks like he might be.
I think he did.
I think he is
I think
frozen.
he
I was
froze.
like, either that or he's
Yeah.
really considering this. Stephanie, thank you for, I know you are busy. You're zooming in and zooming out of everywhere. So can you tell us a little bit about, we still have 90 participants on this webinar. Can you tell them a little bit about what's going on tonight? You've got something happening.
Yeah, so NCSS is, for the first time, kind of dipping our toe into doing a student town hall. We're inviting students from across the country to really share with us, you know, issues that they care about. These are high school students, but we have what we call ROCAPA, which is our National Honor Society for Social Studies. So really trying to engage those students, listen to them and not talk, and hear about the issues that matter to them, whether it be related to the election or just sort of in general issues that they're facing in their life. So we're really excited about that. I think we can probably link that information in the chat box maybe, but hope you will check out that or follow Hear Our Voices is the hashtag on Twitter.
Great. And
I'll also, Martin,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Martin, you're probably going to make a plug for our upcoming webinars. Go ahead.
No, you go for it, and I'm going to get a link for everyone for the town
That's
hall.
what I figured. I'd help you out. Awesome. Yeah, and so I'll also plug, we have 2 more webinars in this series. I'll be speaking with Natalie Wexler, the author of The Knowledge Gap, in a few weeks. And then we'll also have a district panel talking about kind of the implications, and some districts that are actually been talking about social studies instructional mandates of time at the elementary level. And so we'll have some conversations with those district leaders to talk about what's been happening at that level. So we'd love for you all to join us again. Please register at inquirED.org/webinars.
Yeah, so thanks to everyone who joined us today. I'm sure Adam would say a big thank you if he were here. And I will share information about how to find out more about their study here in the blog post on Wednesday. So thank you all for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.